Hi everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio TV. This is your host James and I'm super excited to have two friends and guests on the show today. I'm going to be speaking to Mr. Brien Foerster and Miss Maria Wheatley, and the reason we are on the show today is we're going to talk about elongated skulls, and Brien is a veteran of this subject. Two books, The Enigma of Cranial Deformation and his Elongated Skulls of Peru and Bolivia book as well. Fascinating research from Brien. Maria has been on recently as well, talking about elongated skulls at Stonehenge. So we are going to collaborate today and see what we got on the global situation of elongated skulls. And I think we'll kick this off probably with you, Brien. Hey, Brien, welcome to the show, first of all.
Oh, always a pleasure, James, and a pleasure to finally meet Maria.
Oh, for sure. Maria, welcome to the show. We are here in great company today. We're going to talk about elongated skulls. Good to see you again, Maria.
Thank you for having me on the show, and it's a great pleasure and honour to be on this show with Brien.
Oh, great. Brien, I guess elongated skulls, where is the research? I know you chisel away at this. I know you've done the cranial deformation and then tapped into the Peru and Bolivia skulls book as well. Where are we at in terms of the research on skulls in an anthropological sense, Brien?
Well, we're actually getting very close to the possibility of DNA testing now. I'm actually today contacting a number of major ancient DNA researchers in different parts of the world to see if we can utilize one or more of their laboratories in order to do testing. And we have one of the chief ranking archaeologists of all of Peru is in charge of this project. So that's the best thing. I'm to some degree in the background of it. It's up to these academics to work with each other and see if we can finally get some proper DNA testing, at least beginning with the Baraka skulls.
Wow. Maria, you astonished to find the elongated skulls in Stonehenge. You're aware of Brien's work anyway. Do you find this a mind-blowing adventure?
Absolutely, James. I was fully aware of Brien's work and ongoing work into the elongated skulls and elsewhere. So when I decided to re-look at the old archaeological reports of the Stonehenge environs, as well as visiting some museums, I was literally astonished to find that they were very similar to the Maltese sort of skulls. And the antiquarian reports clearly said the size of them and described them as elongated. And it was almost like pushed to one side by British academic archaeologists.
Wow. Brien, are you surprised to find the elongated skulls in Stonehenge?
Well, I would say pleasantly surprised, because what we find is that the elongated skulls, which have been found on 6 continents, well, not Antarctica so far, but basically and islands in the Pacific, it's always the nobility. And so since Stonehenge is such a significant ancient site in Britain, I was pleasantly surprised that evidence of people of a high stature like that could have been there as well.
Sure. Maria, that's exactly what we talked about on the last show, was that there's some sort of a nobility element to this in Stonehenge.
Absolutely. There is a clear and direct link, because not everybody in the Neolithic landscape of Stonehenge was entombed into a long barrow. There were lots of flat graves for common people high on the coast. So to go into the long barrows meant you were either a priest or of the royal family or a ruling elite within that area. So it was clear there were sort of different classes of people amid the Stonehenge environs.
Wow. Maria, paint a picture for us in the barrow. This barrow wasn't small. This was quite a long, massive barrow. Paint the size of this and why we think nobility, why we think a queen with the elongated skull.
Okay. The long barrow I call Captain Queen, the Neolithic Queen of Stonehenge was entombed in, massive. I mean, for example, you get very long mounds. They can be up to 300 feet in the Avery environs, and the famous example there is the West Kennet Long Barrow. But on the Salisbury Plain, which is owned and managed by the military, that's what we call the MOD in the UK, there was a massive, much, much larger long barrow, the largest in Northwest Europe. So it's nearly 400 feet long, and inside of which was placed a Neolithic woman with an elongated skull. And it was a single burial. And most long mounds within the Stonehenge and Avery environs, in fact, throughout the southwest of England, were communal burial places. They weren't normally for one person alone. So that's intriguing in itself. Very different and very unusual.
Wow. Brien, what do we find about burials of the elongated skulls? I know some of them have been in museums, and we're not entirely sure the origins of the original location, but some of them have been found at burial sites. What's the burial like for these elongated skulls?
Well, again, in Peru, it was only the nobility that had elongated skulls, whether you go to Tiwanaku and Pumapunku or you go to Cusco, because the Inca may originally have had elongated skulls. And in the Paracas area, it was only in the royal sections of cemeteries that you find the elongated skulls. We know their nobility because the textiles are the finest, the ceramics are the finest. That's where you find gold and silver objects, etc. Mm-hmm. And these cemeteries are always in the sand dune or very desert-like areas, but raised above and looking out over agriculture and the ocean. So for some reason, they wanted the elite to be buried in a very beautiful setting, being able to see the productivity of the agriculture and the open Pacific behind that.
Sure. I think we've got very distinct, the Paracas skulls are really the really long ones. Is there other types too, though, Brien? It's not just Paracas type skulls. There's a couple of different variations. Is that correct?
Yeah, we distinguish about 5 different shapes. The Paracas are the classic vertical cone heads. But then up in the Tiwanaku area and Pumapunku, it's more like they're more swept back, almost like what you see with the Amarna people of Egypt, as in, the depictions of Akhenaten, etc. Then there's another design which is like a double dome shape. It's almost like an M-shaped skull, and then two very basic, obvious examples of cranial deformation where the back of the skull has been flattened, and to some degree the forehead has been flattened. So I would say 5 different variations, and in some cases you'll find 3 or 4 different shapes in the Paracas area, and some believe that the shape could designate the social order of that person, that the priesthood would be one way, the royal family would be another way, etc.
Wow. Maria, you want to comment on the shape of the skull at Stonehenge? It's quite a unique shape. It's probably, as we said, it's not like the Paracas, but it is very elongated.
Well, exactly. I think the Paracas skulls, the cone heads, are, very unique. The Stonehenge ones, I would liken more to the Maltese or Egyptian examples, sure. But it's interesting what Brien has just said about the beautiful setting of the burials overlooking the ocean. Most of the barrows that the elongated skulls were found in the Stonehenge environs are intimately associated with water, springs or rivers, on high places, beautiful locations where one feels close to the heavens above, but very situated by large rivers that flow through the area. So water is a feature for sure.
Wow. Brien, tell us about the baby elongated skull. This one seems to captivate people's imagination for some reason. We just think that we're going to find adult skulls, but there's baby elongated skulls. I think this kind of speaks a lot of volumes too.
Oh, it does. And actually, the classic one is actually from the Cusco area they called it Waiki. And I've had at least 20 medical professionals physically be with me and look at it, and they just can't understand what it is they're looking at. When you say, is this cranial deformation, they say, I don't see how that's possible, because the skull is the size of the torso. There's no medical condition that can possibly explain that away. But unfortunately, only one in the area has been found. But I was recently sent a photograph from a museum in Austria, and it was a 4-year-old. They believe, based on the thickness of the skull, it still has a lot of the rich red hair attached to it. Again, it died at about 4 years old, and it definitely was a Paracas person. There are hundreds of Paracas skulls, and to some degree mummies, in different museums all over the planet, because up until the 1960s, the Peruvian government didn't really control the movement of pre-Columbian artifacts. Mm-hmm. Now it's very strict, but at that time and before that, a lot of major museum collections worked that way. I'm sure the Smithsonian and the British Museum, did not necessarily legal procedures to acquire artifacts. So it was quite common, especially in the early 20th century, to be able to take remains out of any country and move them around.
Mm. Wow, it's a good question. Maria, do we have anything about the hair colour of the Stonehenge elongated skull?
Not to my knowledge of the skulls that I've seen within the university. They are quite contaminated, though, because they've been constantly handled. The kind of very early Victorian era, one had to be glued back together, so they're considered quite contaminated. And from what I saw, there was no remains of hair whatsoever.
What about sagittal sutures, Maria?
Again, very identical to the Maltese examples. So they are literally the same. And in the book, I do give an example of the Maltese one and the Stonehenge skull, and they have that identical trait. So in a way, that identifies them to be elongated, I surmise.
Wow. Brien, have you looked at the Maltese skulls? I presume you've come across this case and the Egyptian cases as well.
Well, the very few photographs that are available of the Maltese skulls, and they are horizontally distended, and the sagittal suture or the parietal suture just doesn't seem to be there at all. And that's exactly what we find in the classic examples of the Paracas skulls that appear to be natural in form, because they'd be far too complex to try to bind when you get all these different curves and things. But that sagittal suture is simply missing. It's not that it's calcified over through age. It's not there.
Can you explain that? I know you've got a background in biology, Brien, so I'm going to throw this one at you. But can you explain that to the audience that's not familiar with the sagittal suture, the importance of that?
Sure. Well, basically, we all have a suture line that comes across this way, and then another one that connects with that and goes backwards. So it's like a T shape. And every human being has that, because that's how the plates when you're a baby form. You're kind of gelatinous when you come out of your mom, obviously, because that's what nature did. And then over time, up until about 3 years, it takes about 3 years for all that calcium to build up. And so you have three major plates that come together. In the case of the classics that Maria's talking about, the Maltese and the one she's seen in England, and the Paracas and some others, this suture line here simply isn't there. You have this one across, but not this one coming backwards. And medical professionals just say, I don't understand that, because it's not what they studied in school. You have to have this one there, and it's like, it's not there.
Wow. Yeah, I met Giorgio De Tsoukalos in Stuttgart, and he had shot some footage for a documentary, and his father is a doctor, and he showed his father the sagittal suture, and his father's just blown away, just from his own medical profession. He said it's one of the most fascinating things to see a skull without a sagittal suture. It's totally mind blowing. Maria, is it right to say these are identical to the Maltese skulls?
Yeah, they have no suture going down that way. So for me, that was confirmation that there was something, different going on. Also, in one of the long barrows, which is in a no-go area on the Salisbury Plain, and I find it quite interesting that the most interesting archaeological finds in the United Kingdom are on military soil, and it's very hard to access these sites. Cannot be coincidental. But on one of these long barrows, which was a very much a layered barrow of organic and inorganic material that linked to water, a vast amount of water. So you had lots of things going on potentially for this barrow, producing possibly free energy, for example, to finally being a burial place. There were children in those barrows. Now, all of the skulls have gone missing, unfortunately, and which is quite often the case in the UK. But the descriptions that the antiquarian gave of the skulls indicate strongly that they were larger and more elongated than what the Victorians were used to seeing in their children and the society then in the Victorian era. So I think there could have been children in the Stonehenge environs with elongated skulls. Cannot be dismissed.
Wow. Yeah, I think there's only 6 of the 5,000 original Maltese skulls left. 6. I know, it's like so shocking on archaeology. It really is. I'm just glad that there's still some left. Do you think there's a clandestine approach, Maria, to wipe this from the record?
In the UK, I strongly feel that this has been hidden from archaeology. It is in no textbook. You try to find this information in any archaeological textbook, it is simply not there. The only people that ever mentioned elongated skulls in a medical sense was the early Victorians. And they were trying to open it up. They were discussing it in that era. But then there seemed to be a real closet with the archaeological community, and that still is the case. That said, I've got another permit to go to another university to view another elongated skull, this time from the Avebury environs, in a few months' time.
Can Capricorn TV invite himself to go and get some footage?
I think Capricorn TV is more than welcome, James.
Wow. Maria, I think we spoke before, there was a sort of a racism going on trying to put a different skull group into like some racial class.
That was a strange thing, because once the Victorians had rediscovered, the skulls from the long barrows, it became quite fashionable in Victorian times to say that the more European round skulled people were the superior race, and that the ancient Britons had elongated skulls and they had less intelligence, which I'm sure both Brien and I totally disagree with, but that was the case then. So then Hitler got onto the idea of, these superior people that used to be in prehistoric times. So they associated the two. And once the archaeologists realized that the two had been fused and it would started to be called the Aryan race, from the 1940s right up until the present day, it was considered, let's talk about the beaker culture, which is sort of the Bronze Age, 2500 BC, a culture that came into the UK. Let's call them the beaker culture. Before that, they were called the round-headed ones. So they changed, they looked at it and called it the beaker culture.
The thing that I find amazing, and I'll come back to you in a second, Brien, you have megalithic Malta, the Hypogeum with skulls, and you have now Stonehenge. We have two ends of Europe, megalithic, showing clear indications of elongated skulls. I think it just begs to be investigated. Maria, how many skulls are we talking in Stonehenge and other places?
In the Stonehenge environs, on the Salisbury Plain, which is 25 miles by 25 miles and contained in totality over 2,500 ancient sites alone. All of the long barrows within that area, according to the reports, contained elongated skulls. All of them.
Wow. Wow. Brien, what's it like with the establishment in Peru or Bolivia for that matter? Do they address this in a more open-minded manner rather than the trappings of our British history over here?
Fortunately, yeah, Peru and Bolivia, there isn't as much constriction, like from what I hear that Maria says, and of course Egypt is the ultimate example of.
Oh yeah.
But no, the academics simply regard elongated skulls as being some sort of ceremonial thing that was done to distinguish the elite from the common people. But when I ask the archaeologists, do you know where the Paracas people originated from, because they have these profoundly big skulls and it seems genetically red hair, they simply say no. And that's why our head archaeologist, who's been frustrated by this for decades, is very much open to having some genetic testing done to see if the Paracas themselves 100% evolved, in this area, or if there could be a genetic influence from somewhere else, especially with the red hair element. Is it possible that part of their ancestry came from across the Pacific, from some other part of the world, and created this, this quite unique culture?
Sure. Wow. Brien, what way do you go for with the DNA testing? Is that on the hair, the red hair, or the teeth, or?
Genetic testing keeps changing all the time. Fortunately, the cost of ancient DNA testing has dropped by 90% in the last 3 years.
Wow.
Because before that, it was horrifically expensive. The main reason being because it's not like you pricking your finger and having your blood sample taken. The analogy I make is your DNA is this perfect little cord that they can analyze. But ancient DNA of 2,000 years plus is like taking that cord and putting it into a blender for a couple of minutes. It's organic material that breaks down. So all of the genetic material breaks apart, and it's only the most sophisticated computer programs that can put them back together. So that's what we're working on right now, is what are the best labs that can do it and which ones are interested. Because many ancient DNA labs are university-based, and they don't take outside clients, but we're trying to find one or two that will do this along with our archaeologists.
Sure. Brien, can we associate any of the 5 elongated skull groups in Peru or Bolivia to monuments, whether that's megalithic or pyramids, or can we say that these guys are monument builders as well?
I believe so. That's what my latest book is about.
Yeah.
It's quite intriguing that in Peru and Bolivia, almost every megalithic site is located in a straight line, which is called the Path of Viracocha. That's an ancient name for it. We've had a number of dowsers with Hugh Newman come with us. They've been able to map the Path of Viracocha. So we went from one megalithic site to the next, and they kept reading the same energy line. Mm-hmm. And at every one of those sites, you find elongated skulls.
Wow. Did you hear that, Maria? Dowsing.
Yeah.
Yes, that's how. Nobody has yet asked me how I found the elongated skull.
Oh, here we go. Well, Maria, tell us how you found the elongated skulls.
Well, exactly. Nobody's asked me that yet, so I thought I'd better ask it of myself on the show. But I actually found that through dowsing, and for the spiritually aware of Capricorn Radio listeners, through past life regression. By combining those two disciplines, I found the elongated skulls of Stonehenge, because I think it's not just straight lines. Certainly, it's not just straight lines that link all of the barrows in the Stonehenge environs. You have more traditional kind of coiled energy lines, known in ancient China as the coil of the dragon, which is very, very strong because it causes a vortex. Whereas a straight linear ley line, for instance, makes energy travel very fast in one direction. So if we apply the ancient wisdom of China feng shui to dowsing, then we can see that the energy of the ones where Brien and Hugh have doused, the energy is going from one place to another. It doesn't seem to do that in Stonehenge. It's going around the monument, not through it. So I find that quite interesting. There's a kind of distinctive difference there. So I think, we need to kind of constantly look and research these different types of findings. For me, past life regression and the spiritual side really addressed a lot about the elongated skulls of Stonehenge and Dowsing.
Wow. You know what I like about both you guys is Brian's originally from a biology background, and Maria's from an archaeology background, and you both guys are looking at skulls in detail, probably out of necessity because nobody else is doing it, and there is a necessity to do that. Maria, you spoke about tree panning before. I want to just recap on that. Tell us about the tree panning, because the skulls also show evidence of tree panning at Stonehenge too.
Yes, they were slightly later and more round-skulled people from the round barrows, because another discovery that I made in the Stonehenge environs, just before I answer your question, James, was that all monuments built in ancient prehistoric Neolithic times were elongated. You have the Cursors monuments. They were gigantic, massive earthwork structures, probably with banks 10 feet high with no entrances, as if man was being kept out of them. And our largest Cursors monument was 7 miles long, found in Dorset. That's a 7-mile long structure. That was an elongated shape. The long barrows, they were all elongated shapes. So I feel that the ruling elite of the Stonehenge environ were constructing monuments depicted maybe their skulls. Maybe this was symbolic of their skulls, because when it came to the round-headed so-called Dika people that migrated to the British Isles and made different types of monuments, such as the stone circles, which are round, and the round barrows of which they were interned, you only find round skulls in round barrows and long skulls in long barrows. So that was another discovery.
Wow.
Yeah?
That's mind-blowing. That's mind-blowing.
It is a statement. It's a prehistoric statement of a long-lost people and a long-lost civilization that has been completely ignored. And that is archaeologically correct. Yep, that cannot be disputed.
The tree panning, Maria, we talked about Stonehenge being like a medical centre. There was like so much going on there in terms of megalithic and architecture and construction. But when you look in the archaeological record, it seems like there were so many cases, I think, of trepanation there that people must have came there to have it done. It couldn't be just everybody needed tree panning done. It's like there wasn't a necessity for everybody to have their head opened up, basically.
Yes. Now, yes, there is an awful lot, a high percentage of Japan skulls around Stonehenge environs. That is, again, a big link. You don't get that in any other megalithic complex in the southwest of England. So it is unique, if we will, to Stonehenge itself. Now, the skulls that have been found that I had surgery on, at one time, the archaeological story was that, it was to release a negative spirit. It was to release epilepsy, or it was shamanic in some way. But recently, in the Devizes Museum, which is very close to my hometown, they were reevaluated. They were looked at again with fresh eyes and younger, less bigoted archaeologists. And they're looking at them differently and said this could be applied for brain surgery or for a brain tumor. It was a medical procedure, possibly. So now we're moving away from the shamanic ritual interpretation to a more surgical interpretation. One of the unique things about Stonehenge area is that it's in a slight valley. It kind of dips down like that, and the very near center of Stonehenge, where the altar stone is, emits a 7 hertz to 11 hertz frequency, which is the same as the Schumann resonance, for example. So I think our ancient ancestors could put people in a relaxed state, not necessarily, and I'm sure they used it with hallucinogenic drugs or drugs, natural herbs that could introduce a trance state, but through the earth energies themselves, because I'm one of the few people that actually test out earth energies, and that's why I know, roughly speaking, what a ley line would transmit compared to the coils that I will mention earlier, which we've discovered around the Stonehenge environs. And when you get more of a spiral or a coil, they are the ones that emit the 7 hertz frequency. So I think that puts us into a relaxed state. It puts the mind into alpha, just like acupuncture can start to manipulate your brain frequencies to release pain. I think our ancient ancestors were using earth acupuncture to achieve that state for surgery.
Brien, just on the side note, is there any cases of trepanation in Peru on the skulls there?
Oh, yes.
Wow.
The Paracas people, who conventional archaeology say arose about 1000 BC and disappeared about 100 AD, were masters at surgery, at trepanation surgery. And scientific studies have been done of examples that they found in cemeteries, and they found that the survival rate is up to 50% of these surgical operations, because the bone had grown, some of the surgeries were the size of an American silver dollar, and the bone had completely grown back over top. What they also cleverly knew is that after they had removed the piece of bone to do the manipulation of the brain, because again, like Maria was saying, the conventional story is, well, it was bad spirits or somebody got whacked on the head by somebody or whatever. But it seems more that they were trying to tinker with the glands inside, like the pineal, etc. Then they would put a thin film of either silver or gold over top. Silver is a natural antibiotic, and gold does not react with the body. And so for some reason, these people, these so-called primitive people, knew how to do successful brain surgery 2,000 plus years ago. But where did they learn it from is my big question.
The earliest example that I have found of that operation comes from 12,000 BC in a cave. Now, they know that it was from that era because the animals found by it, you had extinct elephants, slightly like mammoth-like, and very old feline cats. So I think this operation goes back to before 12,000 BC. And just because that's very low down in the archaeological layering system, and this was found in a cave in France.
Wow. This is mind-bending. You've got trepanation and you've got elongated skulls on both parts of the globe. You just don't associate these two things together, but they're there and they're in the record. I just think it's amazing, I really do.
Yes, it could be the case. I don't know what Brien feels about this, but it could be the case that there was a kind of, a whole globe of people that were very similar, with the elongated skulls representing maybe the spiritual or the kind of leading community on a global level, not just, unique to different countries. I think they were all contemporary at the same time and created different monuments worldwide for different purposes.
Maria, do you see the evidence of the bones knitting and healing after trepanation? Do you ever see any evidence of that?
Absolutely. For the bone to heal, obviously means the operation has been successful. And in the Stonehenge area, you had a success rate. I also found what I thought was instruments that were used for that in the Stonehenge environs, which I showed on Ancient Origins website, I think, and that is classed as a hairpin, but it looks very similar to surgical instruments used in contemporary times.
Really? Brien, any idea on the surgical implements utilized for the trepanation in Peru or Libya?
Yeah, the artifacts that actually we have in the little Paracas Museum, where I'm the assistant director, is very fine needles long, fine needles, and also, what's the name of the volcanic stone?
Obsidian.
Yeah, very, very fine obsidian surgical instruments,
Wow.
which of course they still use in modern surgery, because obsidian you can have an edge on obsidian which is superior to anything of metal.
Yeah, it's better than surgical steel, they say.
Right.
Maria, do we know anything about obsidian in the megalithic record in Britain?
There have been obsidian finds. I don't know whether that was associated with surgical instruments or not. But on the skulls that had the surgery, it was discovered that there was saw marks, just like you have in instruments being used now, on the skull left as evidence. So we can start to see different types of surgical instruments being used. Other artifacts that may indeed have been used for surgery were very large and long tweezers that were found in a lot of the Stonehenge round barrows. So we have different types of surgical instruments. And also with the very pure water filtered through the chalk in the Stonehenge environs, I think water was clearly available at Stonehenge. And in fact, just outside of the Stonehenge environs, there's a Mesolithic city or town that has just been found, far, far older than Durrington Walls. This takes Stonehenge to 10,000 BC. And now that you've got that program of Durrington Walls out of the way with the new stone finds, the next program I think you'll find that is going to be aired is changing the dates. They have found on this program that is about to be released a standing stone that is Mesolithic. And I have found myself for my next book, Mesolithic standing stones are common in the Stonehenge environment. This isn't Neolithic.
Wow. I'm guessing Durrington Walls, Maria, hit the news there. Are there any burials at Durrington Walls that we might expect to find?
There were the most strangest burial that I know by Durrington Walls has been ploughed out. But you have to search in what's called the National Monuments Record Office for finds. And that's how I find out a lot of things, by going to a big library, basically. Mm-hmm. And the structure of a burial mound that clearly wasn't a burial mound, right next to Durrington Walls, was a long mound, with no burial chambers, organic and inorganic layering, with a massive central chimney coming out of the centre. So what was going on there? Is this an ancient kind of energy system? Mm-hmm. Is it something else that we don't understand? That one long barrow find is being completely dismissed by the archaeological community because it cannot be answered. There's no easy way to find that. Plus, at the base of that so-called Neolithic monument, on the Neolithic soil surface, was evidence of rust. That means iron in the Neolithic age, which archaeologists would say cannot be, because that should be the new Stone Age, when copper wasn't discovered, let alone iron.
Yeah, I just come, as you know, from back from Germany, where there was iron inside the Great Pyramid as well. I just think, is there anything right in our archaeological view of history? Brien, maybe I'll just throw a little hypothetical to you. If we got elongated skulls on both sides of the globe, Peru and Stonehenge, who came to who? Who was here? Who was where first? Is it right to think like that? Did Peru go to Stonehenge? Did Stonehenge people go to Peru? Is it right to maybe a global maritime culture going everywhere?
Well, from what I've been able to find out, again, on all 6 continents you have cranial deformation. I honestly think the origin is in the Middle East and goes very far back in time, and then migration from there eastward and westward. I've only seen one actual elongated skull that is thought to be Egyptian so far. That's one of the great mysteries. Why did Akhenaten portray his daughters and whoever, with these elongated skulls? The Cairo Museum is probably hiding them in the basement, as we know, with all of the examples of lost ancient high technology they probably have. But yeah, that's what we're starting to believe, is that we think the bloodline began somewhere in the Middle East and spread out. Attila the Hun, he had a deformed skull. And so when he invaded in from the east, he brought that in to the Germanic tribes, etc. So it's an ongoing thing. Thank God for the internet to be able to find, research papers on this.
Sure. Bizarrely enough, I was Googling Maria's book today to pull it up for the show, and I put in elongated skull Stonehenge, and it come up at a site in Russia. There's what they call Russia Stonehenge. An elongated skull was found in Russia, which is very close to the Kazakhstan border. Again, bizarre that we have another, what looks to be megalithic monument, at least 1700 BC, some bizarre concentric circles of stone or some sort of stuff going on, and then the elongated skull found right beside it.
Yeah, well, I think it's a very important point, which is what Maria brought up earlier, that there is there's the scientific archaeological aspect to everything. Then there's also the intuitive, dowsing aspect. And when you put both of them together, that's when you have a really interesting story. They're not mutually exclusive. And I can't stand scientific people who will diss people who do energy reading and dowsing as being flakes. I mean, we're looking at subtle energies. We're looking at constructions that we can't comprehend from a Western European mentality, or at least modernly. So you have to look at both sides. Both sides of the brain have to be entertained here, because both are trying to tell you something.
Wow. Any comments on that, Maria?
Well, as a dowser, I feel that it can be combined with the scientific side, which is what I've been trying to do, because I do feel that sometimes it is a bit flaky and people find things everywhere. So what I've tried to do in my dowsing is to prove it. So where I find a dowsing section, I've asked people with instrumentation to see what's going on there. I think to use both, a bit like what Brian's saying with the left and the right brain, is great. But I do feel that dowsing has its flaws. As a second generation dowser, I was taught its flaws as much as its benefits. I think we need to look at that as well, because it's a science, and we need to do that. But going back to the elongated skulls of more of the European royal bloodline, certainly Prague has elongated skulls. I recently went to Prague and have found elongated skulls of the royal bloodline there as well in Neolithic terms. So, and it seems, that is again very similar to the Stonehenge, and we need to kind of join the dots of all of this. Did it come from the Middle East? Did it come from the West? I'm very open-minded, and we'll go where the research takes us all to answer those sort of questions.
It's just incredibly bizarre, just even the show for us today. It's incredibly bizarre story to get into of what's going on in our past, especially when we're talking skulls and strange skulls, trepanation. Like you say, the research needs to be done. Maria, do me a favour, take a moment to give out the name of your book and the website, and then we'll catch Brian's as well. Okay,
the name of my book is The Elongated Skulls of Stonehenge, and my website is www.theavebury, A-V-E-B-U-R-Y, theaveburyexperience.co.uk.
Okay. Brien, give us the name of your books on elongated skulls and where we can get copies of them on your website, please, too.
Okay, well, the first book I wrote with David Childress, called The Enigma of Cranial Deformation. That was a global survey of elongated skulls. Now it has to include Maria's work. And the new one is The Elongated Skulls of Peru and Bolivia, and subtitled The Path of Viracocha. And it focuses on Peru and Bolivia Elongated skulls have been found elsewhere in South America, but not in the concentrations that they are in this area that we call the Path of Viracocha. And my website is hiddenincatours.com.
Wow. And we may see each other in Mexico. I know you got a Mexico tour coming up. Best of luck with that one, Brien, as well. I think it's a fascinating place, Mexico. Great to see you down there as well, Brien. I guess I'll wrap things up with that, guys. Unless you got any other final comments you want to make.
One final comment I think links what Brien has been discussing about some of the finds is on what seemingly is on one of the elongated skulls, and certainly has been found on Bronze Age rounder skulls, is a copper trace of some kind of like headband, as it's been interpreted in archaeological terms, which comes down slightly here, which could be, again, used for surgery. I think there was an advanced civilization in the Stonehenge environs using surgery, and Stonehenge was a place of healing and also a university to teach others its skill and its knowledge base.
Okay. Brien, you have any final comments before we go?
Yeah, thankfully we have two artists. One is Mark LaPlume and the other is Maria K. Moore, and they're both doing interpretations of what they think the skulls would look like if they were fleshed out. Oh. So Mark does drawings. He's done about 4,000, I think, of examples from around the world. And Marcia does three-dimensional modeling. She was on Ancient Aliens with me, showing how that works. Mm-hmm. And now she's actually doing video where she's having the eyes open and closed and the mouth moving. And both of them don't believe from their interpretations that the physical look of these people, at least in the Paracas area, were necessarily 100% Native American. They don't look like that. They look like they're a mix of different peoples from around the world. Sure. So the more work that's done on that, the better.
Sure. Wow. Well, great to have both you guys on the show. Elongated Skull special for sure. Bizarre that we have two Capricorn radio guests from different parts of the globe doing research, but great to have this show today as well, guys. So thank you for your time.
Absolute honor. Great to meet you, Maria.
Thank you both.